Mary, I want to welcome you for our next contribution. You've had an extensive background in the church. Maybe you can share that with our viewers. I really look forward to hearing kind of what your perspective is on some of the challenges in church leadership. What works, what doesn't work. And for the record, I'm a fan of Mary's work. I wish that she would be hired by different chanceries to come in and put together a bishop's office. I just think that this is Mary's sweet spot, one of many actually. But Mary, let me turn it over to you. And again, thank you for being with us today.
Well, you're most welcome. I hope I can live up to that wonderful introduction, Pia. As Pia mentioned, we've been friends for many years. I am a civil lawyer by training, but for 28 years worked for the Archdiocese of Chicago in a variety of roles. I was the director of the Respect Life Office, which is otherwise known as the Office for Pro-Life Activities. I did that as a young lawyer for about 7 or 8 years. And then was asked by now Bishop Paprocki, but at the time Father Paprocki, to become the first female vice chancellor in the Archdiocese. And that was a position I held for a number of years until Cardinal George tapped me to run the day-to-day operations of the Office of the Archbishop in the Archdiocese of Chicago. So for those of you who might not be kind of familiar what an archbishop's office would look like in a big metropolitan see like Chicago, we had 9 staff members, 2 part-time, 7 full-time, secretarial staff, 2 people in the scheduling office alone, other staff that served as master of ceremonies, and then I was the executive assistant to the Archbishop, which meant I kind of supervised the staff, except for the one ordained member of the staff who I did not supervise. That was Cardinal George's preference, and kept sort of the day-to-day operations going. At this point, this would have been more snail mail rather than email, but managing that flow of mail, helping with correspondence and speeches, that sort of thing. So it was a real challenge, but also a great gift. I wish I had walked around with a recorder more to take down some of the things that Cardinal George would say. But so he was a great person for collaborating with the laity, and had, I think, a great interest in seeing women hold positions of responsibility when they were qualified to do so. But one of the things he would frequently say to staff, to all of us, when he got together, all the employees, would you be doing your work any differently if Jesus Christ did not exist? And that was a great sort of starting point for our, thoughts in terms of how we were doing our jobs. And, I love what Father Bob had to say about the cooperation of the lay faithful. The majority of the people who worked at our pastoral center were lay people. But that also presents a challenge. And it presents a challenge because I think we're really starting, frighteningly enough, if the Pew study and some of the other recent surveys of people who call themselves practicing Catholics are to be believed, the majority of them would not have what 30 or 40 years ago would have been considered a 5th or 6th grade knowledge of Catholicism. And I wish I was exaggerating that, but I'm not. You can look at John Cavadini's article. He's the head of the theology department at Notre Dame, the best and the brightest of Catholic young people coming. And he wrote an article for Commonweal, of all places, a very sort of leftist center religious publication, about how distressed he was at the lack of basic knowledge of the faith that his incoming freshmen had, including frightening tidbits like half of them couldn't name the 4 Gospels. And literally, they didn't know what the Immaculate Conception was. They couldn't define transubstantiation. I mean, real sort of basic pillars of our faith could not be articulated by Catholic college freshmen. And so I think we're dealing with, and again, I'm not laying blame at anyone's feet for this. The new Pew study showed that if Catholics who self-identify only went to CCD, or it's called different things in different places, but essentially it is the weekend or after school program for children who attend public schools. And that's about 90% of all Catholics in the United States. The children attend public schools, do not attend parochial schools. Of that, if they only went to CCD in the morning not in the morning, for grade school and for high school, on a Saturday morning for an hour, by the time they were 25, only 5% of those students in that cohort were actually practicing the Catholic faith. We lose 95% of those people. And, I have a dear friend who's a parish catechist, and she shares my frustration. She said, you try to educate 300 kids in this parish who go to public schools on the budget that I have with a staff who was all volunteers. They're not trained to teach theology. They're not trained to teach religion in any kind of formal way other than the little program that the parish puts them through. So this is sort of what we have left lay people to, is really a tremendously suboptimal education. And so this, of course, we would hire, obviously, from this pool of laity. And, I would sometimes, I remember causing kind of a little bit of a stir I was out with some evangelical friends, and I mentioned my frustration. This was when I ran the pro-life office, that not all of my colleagues at the office were pro-life. Not all of them shared the church's teaching on this. And they looked at me as if I had 3 heads had just sprouted out of my shoulders or something. And they said, at their evangelical churches, they said, you have to sign a profession of faith before we hire you as a layperson. We would never allow someone who didn't fully share our convictions, both theologically and on moral issues, to work here. We just wouldn't do it. You would have to, have a recommendation from your pastor, et cetera, et cetera. So I think going back at a minimum to hiring for mission is really critical, but also to keep in mind, and this was something that Cardinal George would often say to us, the hierarchical structure of the church is not a human invention. It comes from Christ, and therefore I am not free as your bishop to change it. And you may want a more sort of lateral workforce base, or to be able to give input in a sort of way that would supersede my authority as the Archbishop, but that's not how Christ organized the church, and we're bound to that here. And also attempted to emphasize, and this was very helpful, I think, for a lot of our employees who worked in the more social service-based departments or agencies, peace and justice related, that the church is different from a humanitarian agency or from a social service agency. We are not the same, and we can't go into it with that same kind of, attitude or incentive behind our work. And it may have wonderful humanitarian properties to it, but that's not why it exists. So we exist for the church. And so it's just sort of being for 28 years where, the Catholic sausage was made, so to speak. It is, I think, really needing to be at this point, at least from my own observations over the years, I think hiring has to be, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, a little more mission oriented. And I'm not talking about having litmus tests, but just really, we shouldn't be hiring people for key positions who don't understand some of the basic tenets of the faith. Or alternatively, we have a good, significant, substantive orientation program for employees. And so that kind of takes away embarrassment from them. So, in case you went to CCD and you're maybe sick that Saturday, here's sort of what, this is what the Trinity is. And I don't mean that to be flippant. There are some people who literally wouldn't have had that working knowledge, and it's not their fault. They were poorly catechized. The church didn't do very much about it, on balance. And now we're seeing the fruits of that, unfortunately. So now that's kind of all of my negative. And I am getting running close to my time. So I'll save some of this for questions and answers. But you do generally tend to have people who, whether or not they know the faith, they apply to the church because they do want to be of service. They do want this to be a way that they give themselves as a gift to the church and to the office of the Archbishop and to his pastoral priorities and needs. So with that, I will turn it over to John, I believe, next, and I'll be anticipating your questions. Thank you.